travel photographer, number one question I get, no matter where I go in the world, is how do you pronounce your name? And it doesn't matter if it's an email, it doesn't matter if I'm meeting people, it's like this mystery to everybody. So now you guys know how I pronounce my name, Elia. If you're from California, you just go like this and say Elia, because that's how they talk in California. In South America, it's Elia, because they do this Spanish like the I, the accent. So that's basically how I pronounce it. Now, I've actually been traveling for a long time. Since 2009 is when I really started getting on the road and traveling, aggressively traveling. And since then, I've actually visited now, I think I'm past 60 countries. I flew over 1 million miles a couple years ago, and now I was actually just totaling everything up because I'm about to cross 1 million just with Delta, and I'm getting closer to 2 million. So I was thinking for the anniversary of 2 million miles, I'd throw a party and actually also get an MRI. Because I'm thinking it might not actually be that healthy. So it's really good. Like all of this travel back and forth is really good for airline status, so maybe not for health. So in 2012, my wife and I decided to do something that was a little bit different. And that was essentially become homeless. But the thing is when you're going to become homeless, you can't tell your parents the word homeless. Don't use homeless. Don't say that. It sounds bad. So we Googled this terminology, and we came up with location independent. And location independent was this nice way to tell our parents that we were basically going to start traveling full time without a location, independent of a single place to stay. So what you're actually seeing there, this was the last, I call it the last holdout. This was our apartment. It was a beachside apartment in Central Florida. These are the Travel Pro bags that I was using. I was blogging about this on Google+. Last thing I did, close the laptop, put it in the bag, throw the boxes in the dumpster, and we were gone for a while, actually. And since then, I was able to do a lot of really fun things. And you guys might see here, I just learned I had a laser pointer yesterday. It doesn't work on the TV. Works over here? Yeah. You guys might see a bunch of bags, camera bags, roller bags, and everything. But what I actually see is a kitchen. There's a living room right there. There's some of the bedrooms, part of the office. Now, if you look at the coffee maker there, this is the most important piece of equipment that I have, that I own. And it's in my hotel room right now as we speak. Now, when you're hiking, when you're traveling, everybody tells you, it's most important is to stay hydrated, right? That's a lie. Don't listen to it. Stay caffeinated. Caffeinated is way more important. So over the years, the tools have kind of changed. You can see here on the bottom, I have a few different FUJIFILM cameras. I also do a lot of drone photography with DJI, so that's a Phantom 4. So a lot of the times, like the gear changes, constantly changing, and it's really heavy, but sometimes I'm able to make local friends, and they can kind of help me. So in Bhutan, I have them. I'm not ashamed of having them help me haul the gear up. But what you're seeing actually here are a collection of boarding passes a few years ago. So when you travel somewhere, you might buy something that you like. You bring it back, you put it in your office, keep it in your home. It reminds you something special in the location that you went to. But imagine your whole life has to fit inside here. Where do you put all that stuff? Especially when airlines don't like it when you check 1 million bags. You guys know how that works. You got to stay under 20 kilos. So we decided to collect boarding passes instead. And a couple years ago, this was actually our storage unit was right there, that blue door on the right. That's where the rest of our possessions went. And we decided to kind of line it out. Now, over the little right corner, I won't spend too much more time on this particular slide, but we don't have custom forms anymore as Americans traveling to the U.S., which I find very disappointing, because I'd be gone so long in between that I visit like 20 countries, and I'd have to write them all on the form. And then I'd go to the immigration line, and they'd see it, and they just like their eyes would get wide, and I was worried at first that they wouldn't let me back in and something was wrong, but they just look at it and they're like, wow, welcome home. Gambit. So throughout that time, it's fun. I've gotten to do some really fun events, different video projects, different shooting projects all over the world. But my favorite thing to do is speaking. And the reason I like speaking and doing these types of workshops and talks is because I actually get to connect personally with you guys. And I think that's really important because social media is such a large part of our lives right now. And I couldn't think of traveling full-time without social media. It would be really difficult to stay connected. But just because we're in constant contact, nothing can replace personal interaction. And I think that's something that's really important. So being able to do these events actually gives us a chance to hang out and talk and actually meet each other. So a lot of you guys have known online for years. It's the first time we actually get to meet. So photography has become not just about taking photos for me, but about the social aspect of getting to meet people and make friends. And I do talks all over the world. I just went to Israel, and they told me it was going to be a big event. And it was 2,100 people. So that was the largest one. So they didn't tell me how many. They just said, yes, it's going to be a big event. So this was the largest one that I've done so far. It was really actually quite fun. I like these much less nervous on these kind of things. And it's interesting, too, because we recently have teamed up with F-stoppers for the past few years to build video tutorials. And they were really fascinated with this boarding pass thing. So our boarding pass collection has actually gotten quite ridiculous. Oh. And there actually is like really triumphant audio attached to this, which is okay. Imagine it's like, there it goes, wait. Oh, we missed it again. Just imagine that was like the most inspirational audio you've ever heard. So the boarding pass collection is actually getting a little ridiculous. My wife wants me to stop, but I'm still collecting them. Like, what do you do with this? We just got hit by a hurricane. I'm like, what do I do with all this paper? Like, do I save it? How important is it? But what I want to get into, the first thing, is choosing strong subjects in travel photography. So my style of travel photography is a little bit different. Travel photography is not a real thing. It's actually kind of funny because the second you leave your home, you're technically a travel photographer. So I'm a travel photographer because I don't live here. If I'm in Florida, I'm not a travel photographer because that's where I live. The distinction is very strange. But for travel photography, kind of splits into cultural or landscape, cityscape, and different things. So I decided to focus on iconic places for a few reasons too. I wanted to visit places that were close to my heart. First place that I wanted to visit was Italy because that's where my family's originally from. I was born in the United States, but I have Italian roots. So when I wanted to start taking photos, it was purely out of the desire to visit beautiful locations around the world. Now, when I was going to Rome, I mean, can you guys think, if you went to Rome, can you think of any piece of architecture that might stand out as iconic? Colosseum. Maybe the Colosseum. Yeah, that was an easy one. I'm going to have to challenge you guys a little bit. I shot this quite a few years ago. Another thing that you'll see as a recurring theme in my work is the lack of people. Now, for travel photographers shoot cultural, heritage sort of things, that's a different style. I like to have no people, which means I have to get up very early in the morning sometime. And in Rome, it's easy. There's beautiful places all over. For some reason, Rome has just amazing sunsets. This is shot from Ponte Umberto, which is the bridge overlooks the Bridge of Angels, Ponte San Angelo, and of course the Vatican in the background. Little tip for you guys too, if you visit Rome and you visit the Vatican, you technically visited 2 countries. If you want to add them to the list. And if you misbehave, the Vatican also has its own jail, so be careful. Pretty sure you disappear from that one. So what about somewhere else? I'm going to challenge you guys. This one's going to be really hard. Can you think of anything in Paris? That was so hard, though. I mean, Vegas has one too, so maybe. So this is, when I went to Paris, so I spent quite a few years not visiting Paris because I didn't want to shoot the Eiffel Tower because I thought it was too iconic. So I decided to work my way around it. I've never actually gone up into the Eiffel Tower. If you want to shoot, this is sort of a view of the whole city. From the Montparnasse Tower, you can actually set up a tripod and shoot. And the sun does set certain times of year right behind. And in Paris, I just wanted to try to show the juxtaposition of old and new. But I consider the Eiffel Tower to be interesting, obviously, but it's not classic, French architecture or European architecture. So I went to the top of Notre Dame, and I wanted to shoot the gargoyles with the Eiffel Tower, the ancient guardians of the city. So cities are pretty easy. They have iconic elements, especially European cities. But what happens when we're dealing with countries? How do we represent countries? Iceland a few years ago was a little bit more difficult, but what comes to mind for Iceland, guys? Aurora, good. That's a good answer. Or somebody could say ice. It's called ice. And then, for me, actually, Iceland has the most beautiful waterfalls in the world. Some of the most beautiful to photograph because they're very easy to find and photograph. So this is Alderfoss in sort of northwestern Iceland. And that was a fun one. So many waterfalls, but then also ice, of course, ice. We go to Iceland and we spend hours photographing ice. The locals think we're crazy. So this is Jökulsárlón, the glacier lagoon. It's one of those places that you have to visit when you go to Iceland. And then across the street from this is the Diamond Beach, is that the beach where all the ice is. And there's nothing funnier to a local Icelandic person than photographers spending 6 hours on the beach photographing ice cubes. So it's funny, and I like to say this because these areas, like Jökulsárlón is Iceland's equivalent of the Eiffel Tower. It's become that location. And we start really diving into representing countries. You know, what comes to mind in Japan? Japan is very, especially in the West, everybody has this romanticism from film and television and these things. But for me, there were a few things happen in Japan. I wanted the nature, and the bamboo forest was something that popped into my mind. I spend multiple trips per year to Japan to capture different things because Japan also has seasonal variation. So we have the idea now that we're finding beautiful areas like Osaka Castle, but also using elements like the cherry blossoms to frame them. The cherry blossoms only last about 2 weeks a year on average. Blooming period, then there's the full bloom, and then when they fall. But weather can take them down within a few days. So it's a very fragile season. Gives you the opportunity to have to visit multiple years in a row because there's only so many places you can visit in the full bloom. But that's when it gets a little bit different and introduces a concept that's the most important in choosing the right moments in time. The right moments in time are really interesting, and this is where the light starts to change. So you pick a beautiful location, and a lot of you guys have been to Greece and been to Santorini. It's a beautiful location. What I'll actually do is arrive early. So in this case, I've arrived in the afternoon, and what I'll do is I'll examine how the light changes. So before sunset, there's some nice golden light. As the sun starts to set, get some nice, hopefully we get nice clouds and some nice color. And there's kind of a dull period, but after that, something really incredible happens, and that's the light from the city itself. So internal light, it's artificial light from the city. And that actually blends with the natural light in the sky. So that was 4 hours of time sitting in one place. Don't feel bad for me, sitting there in Santorini, to get one shot. So that's 4 hours for one moment in time to be able to find the right combination or the perfect moment, which is my definition of it. It could have been a little earlier, it could have been a little later, but this is the one I chose. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated in theory, but actually quite simple in practice. And that's when we pick different moments in time and put them together. So this is a short hike on Lugard Road in Hong Kong, day after a typhoon hit. I'm a typhoon hurricane magnet, and come to find out in my life. This is an early blue hour, and it's early. You can see the lights will actually start to fade. You can see that very turbulent weather is sort of moving through. And there's a lot of times happening here, and the sun's starting to rise. So any piece of this could work, with the fog coming through, could have been earlier, and then the sun coming up and sort of breaching that cloud line. Now, all of this went together. Instead of using one moment in time, I actually decided to choose 2 moments in time. So what I did is I used the sun breaching the clouds and also the blue hour. So what you're actually seeing is an encapsulation or combination of about 30 minutes of time put together. And I'll get into that after we talk about the specific time period. The first one that's really important to understand is the golden hour. The golden hour happens before sunset or after sunrise. In Hollywood, they call it magic hour. And they call it magic hour because everything looks magical. That's literally why they named it magic hour. So all those car commercials you see when the lights, the reflections are really beautiful. If you actually travel to New York City late in the day when everything's reflective, you get this beautiful, almost cartoonish light. Beautiful, beautiful yellows. The reason that happens is the sun's here, it hasn't set below the horizon. The atmospheric perspective causes it, or the atmospheric layering actually causes the light to have a lightly filtered and warm tone. What it also does is it stretches out the shadows, and it lengthens the shadows and softens them, which is very powerful, instead of having harsh light. And in this case, right now, the light's streaming in from the left, illuminating the waterfall and the back wall of the waterfall itself. This is Seljalandsfoss in southern Iceland. And if the sun would have set at this point, what would happen? Light. The sky might have some nice color, it might have some nice color in the clouds, but there'd be no light in the foreground. And we've all learned, no matter what genre of photography we're shooting, light. It's always all about the light that we use. And so here is southern France, Valençol. This is the first 90 seconds of light. When I researched this 5 years ago when I wanted to visit the first time, I was frustrated with photography because there was no light. I saw these beautiful skies and dull foregrounds. Beautiful skies and no light on the lavender. So Naomi and I got up every morning and decided to shoot the first 90 seconds. So this is the first 90 seconds of light. After 2 minutes, 3 minutes, it was too much light. It was time to pack it up for the day and go have very good pastries, but horrible coffee. Don't get it. All the countries that border Italy, why don't they just steal the recipe? But it's fun, that 90 seconds of light. Now, the golden hour can change, and it depends on the time of part of the world you're in. You guys might have like the golden minute and like the blue minute here instead of the blue hour. But sometimes you have to wait for things to come into harmony. And when I say harmony, with this shot in the morning, the first thing that was illuminated was Mount Fuji, but everything was shadowed in the foreground. Next thing that happened is some light filtered through the trees. Some of the cherry blossoms were illuminated. And then eventually the pagoda was illuminated as well. So I had to wait for the right light. So sometimes that hour extends into 2 or 3. And I'll have another version of this shot I'll show you. But probably the greatest time that we have as landscape photographers is sunrise and sunset. It's pretty self-explanatory, and if I could just do a quick poll here, show of hands for everybody who hates sunset. Right, how about sunrises? You guys kind of, some people are like, I don't want to get up early. What's the main difference between sunrise and sunset? Sunset is much more manageable, because you can sleep in. Sunrise is a little different. Now, this is really interesting. What I really like to do, and it's complemented by the fact that the raw technology is really great today. We can shoot directly into the sun. So now we're starting to get the best of both worlds. The sun is still low enough in the sky where it's causing light in the clouds, colors in the clouds, and also still sending light in these warm scenes. And it works in different parts of the world. This village is actually very close by, the one that I just showed you. Same thing, sun's very low, and you can see how sometimes if there's enough haze or there's humidity in the sky, you can almost look at the sun. And when you can almost look at the sun without having to squint, you can actually capture the perfect globe of the sun, but it still illuminates something. And what's cool about this is it's actually a transitional point. You see there's some lights in the town as well. Everything's illuminated, plus the town's starting to light up a little bit, which is kind of cool. Which brings into the next topic. But this is interesting. This is a sunrise, St. Clair Beach, South Island of New Zealand, near a town called Dunedin. And what's interesting is there's an island. See the island at center? I just thought this was so fascinating for like a long exposure photograph. And I have no idea why they built this. They tried to build a bridge out to that island and gave up before they even hit the water. And this is really interesting, and I'll have a before and after, but the sun is just about to break the horizon, but all of the light's still there. So just, even though the sun's not in the scene, since we have reflective elements, there's water, the beach, everything's pulling that light. So it's creating sort of a uniformity of light. But blue hour is my favorite time to take photos. I think this is probably the best time. This happens after sunset or before sunrise. So if you do an early blue hour, you have to get up even earlier. And the distinction of blue hour, we call it a blue hour, but it can be a blue. In Dubai, it's like the blue 15 seconds. It's almost like a blue flash. You're not even sure if it ever happened. You just have to look through your raw files and hope you got it. But if it's a blue hour, we have early blue hour and mid blue hour and late. After late blue hour, it's sort of that nautical twilight, astronomical twilight. The sky gets completely black. We can see the stars. Before that, what this allows you to do is capture, since there still is ambient light in the sky, we name the ambient light to be able to illuminate things like the rocks, the trees, different things like that. Still gives us the ability to capture the artificial light. So what this is a marriage or a harmony between natural and artificial light. And using the blue hour allows us to still have illumination and still have artificial light and illumination. This scene is very interesting because it's actually basically illuminated by the one light on the right, that one yellow light. Now the other nice thing about blue hour, especially in European cities that use tungsten lighting. Now, we are at a transition point in the world where we're starting to turn to cool LED lighting. So this is changing a little bit. But the yellow lighting and the blue color of the sky actually complement each other really well because they're complementary colors. So blue against warm, warm against cool actually works to isolate objects, to keep the focus on the town itself, but it still gives more detail in the shadows. And that's really important. Detail in the shadows with the blue hour is really interesting. This is a little town called Hallstatt in Austria. It's beautiful. This shot's not hard to find. You literally walk down the street and you turn around and you're like, wow. Like, that's it. I have a theory that 600 years ago, they thought that there might be these things called cameras, and they needed to build this city in a way that would attract what they thought were going to be photographers. And I think they were able to do it. With the blue hour, it gives me the ability to still have warm in the mountains and keep all the tones of the architecture itself. If it's full dark, then I'd lose most of this detail and shadow. So that weak ambient light the blue hour still illuminates enough, but it's just dark enough to that where I can enjoy the lights from the town itself. This works I just showed this in Singapore. I was like, I don't know where this is, but this is a fun place. Singapore is a great place for photography because basically you can set up a tripod anywhere you want. And you know, we had a group of 100 people for the photo walk, and I don't even think we were the biggest group of photographers in Marina Bay. Like it's great. But the blue hour is cool because in this case, I had this idea years ago when I visited. I wanted to capture the laser show. And the cool thing about the blue hour is we still get some color and texture in the sky, but we're able to take advantage of any lighting effects. So to me, that becomes very interesting. And it works really well in cityscapes like Dubai. I have another photo of Dubai that I'll show you guys with the fog. This is funny because I'm currently on the 42nd level. This is the view from 42, they call it. It's a bar at the Sheraton Four Points Hotel. Now consider that I'm on the 42nd floor. That's pretty high for Manila, right? 42, 50 floors. That's here. Here. That's 110 floors. That's one of the tallest hotels in the world. So 42 is not that high. And in this case, I was actually in the fog. And it was not high enough to be able to see the city coming out of the fog. But it created a really neat atmospheric effect. So in this case, all of the color from the city itself, the lines in the street, the buildings and everything are actually bouncing light off of the clouds and that low fog. But again, it's that sort of harmony where we're starting to get the light from the sun on the left side mixing with the blue hour. So it's finding that perfect sort of moment in time. This is, my wife was just in Bhutan actually. She left today. She just led a 2-week photo tour to Bhutan. This is Tiger's Nest Monastery. This is my favorite blue hour shot for a simple reason that, come to find out, I was the first photographer in the world to share a blue hour shot of Tiger's Nest, which to me is just absolutely bizarre. And when I was there, we were at the top and I wanted to stay for sunset, and I asked my friend, who's a guide, I said, Yanten, how long have you been a guide? 20 years. Okay. How many times have you been up here? I don't know. Countless times. Maybe thousands of times. It's like, okay, cool. So they light it up at night, right? And he's like, I don't know. Like, Yanten, how can you told me you're coming here for 20 years. You're from Paro. You can't tell me. He's like, I don't know. So why don't you know? Because nobody's ever asked me to stay up here that long. Everybody wants to leave. I'm like, okay, well, they have electricity? Maybe. So I decided to stay. The best part of the story, I think, is that my friend, the director of the project, the video project, Tim Gorski, finally made it up. And I'm like, hey, Tim, he's an old friend of mine. And he's like the definition of a hippie. He's like, oh, hey, yeah, this is beautiful. I'm like, Tim, is it okay if we stay for sunset? He's like, yeah, man, that's great. Let's stay. Let's do it. He's like, but we're going to need some beer. And I'm like, beer? Tim, we just hiked 3 kilometers up the mountain to the Tiger's Nest Monastery. There's nowhere you could possibly get beer. And Yanten goes, I know a place. And I'm like, what? So he just disappears. And we wait. 20 minutes later, a couple monks walk by, and they're carrying 2 buckets of paint. They're doing some restoration. And I very articulate with my words, so I feel a little embarrassed. I was like, hey guys, what's up? And they're like, hello. And I'm like, you guys have electricity, right? And they just kind of looked at me like I was an idiot, like, yeah. And I was like, so you light up the monastery? And they're like, uh-huh. We live here. So we stayed, captured the blue hour. As we were packing up, Yanten actually had hiked all the way down, came all the way back up with big 1,800 lager beers in his pocket. So that actually happened too, and we had to stumble the way down drinking the beer. When I got down, the tourism board told me that they had never seen a photo of Tiger's Nest lit up before. And the Prince of Bhutan himself said he'd never seen such a beautiful photo of Tiger's Nest. So I decided to print a very large version of this and send it. And from what I've heard, it's hanging in the Royal Palace. So it's kind of cool. So it's become my favorite photo because that reason I think is pretty cool. They still haven't sent me a photo of it hanging up. It's hard to get in touch with the Prince of Bhutan. There's many layers of people you have to go through. But what it taught me, and this is a new lesson that I learned, and I'm going to talk about blending time and astrophotography. I didn't do anything special. I waited 2 extra hours, and I was able to capture something that people hadn't captured before, and that fascinated me. I just had an idea, and it wasn't anything too complicated. And that's kind of transitioned into, after watching the weather, is keeping it simple. But everything that I showed you guys so far has to do with weather. weather in landscape photography is just as important as location and light, because it's what gives the scene a personality. So for sunrises and sunsets, very self-explanatory. If you're in a beautiful place and the sky is going off, colors are going crazy, you can't help but be happy. You know, that's what you wait for. And it happens so rare that when you get it, it's something special. This taught me this. I shot this in 2010. This is my first visit to northern Greece, in Meteora. I was there for 4 days. On the fourth day, it was so rainy and foggy, I couldn't see anything. I was really depressed. I was bummed out because we spent our entire savings to go there, and I didn't feel like I got a single shot that I could use. And in the afternoon, I started seeing the tips of the mountains, and I started seeing the weather break up. So I took a taxi to the top and stopped, and what happened was all this fog started sort of rushing through the valley and creating this really nice effect. And since everything was saturated, it really had the fall color and tone. And it taught me that I needed to pay more attention to the weather and never discount a rainy day as something that's not going to happen. So it also did something very unfortunate, because usually rainy days I could take off. Now I can't take rainy days off. I have to go out and shoot anyway because I have to wait for something special to happen. But I've learned some lessons too. And in photography and landscape photography, fog is probably one of the most fun things to capture. And in Tuscany, you kind of wait for this ground fog, this very famous villa here and vineyard. Now this is interesting. This took me 8 mornings to capture. 8 mornings I woke up at 3:30, left the little bed and breakfast I was staying, and drove out, and I couldn't see anything because there's no light, and it was a new moon. So what I'd do is I'd stop on the side of the road, set up my tripod, put the camera on it, turn the ISO all the way up, take a shot. And if I saw fog, I'd stay out in the morning. And every morning it would get closer and closer and closer and closer to the area. And finally on the 8th morning, I got up, was able to get the shot. And on the 9th morning, can you guess what I did? I slept. I didn't know. To get up that early in Italy when you have wine every night is not an easy thing to do. So it was a nice break. 8 days. This is a really neat example because there's a small lightning strike. I learned something very valuable from this photo. A couple things, actually. First thing is I spent 4 years visiting Venice. Don't feel bad for me for that. And when you're in Italy a lot, it's easy to get to Venice, just like you guys have beautiful islands that are close by. But around September and October, what actually happens is, can't use the laser pointer, but dead center here, the sun rises. You can actually get the globe of the sun in the center of this shot. Oh, I was obsessed with this for years. And every year I'd spend a few days in Venice, and every single year that I went in Venice, the clouds were like this. Every single time. Like I was never able to get the shot, and I was frustrated. The last time I was there, we decided to shoot a sunset, and a storm came in, and we started seeing lightning. So I just set the camera to shoot automatically, and Naomi and I were in a good position because we weren't getting rained on. It was in the distance. And I was able to capture just a little lightning bolt. A few weeks later, after I shared this photo, it ended up on Reddit. Some of you guys use Reddit? Yeah, using Reddit is like playing Call of Duty with 10-year-olds. It's like it's the raw internet. So everybody accused me of compositing the lightning in. And I was like, really? Don't you think I would have composited big lightning in if I was going to do that? But I also learned that lightning can play just an incredible role in photography. So this year I was in Florence, and I set up the X-T2, the 50 to 140, and zoomed in because we were having this lightning show. And I was able to just do sequence again, rapid fire. I think I shot 3,000 images onto the memory card, and a few of them had the lightning strikes, so I was able to capture it. So now when there's lightning storms, I don't know if it's like the safest thing to do, like when you stay out, but it's nature, you know, it's something really neat. It causes some sort of special drama, and I never really liked any of the shots that I got from this area before until I captured the lightning. But now I'm kind of excited about thunderstorms, especially when I'm in cities, and shooting under an umbrella and just waiting for the lightning. Now, yeah, I know. Everybody who's visited Dubai or wants to visit Dubai knows the fog. So I put, 6 years and 20-something visits into getting fog in Dubai. And what's interesting about it is, let's say I arrived on a Tuesday. All my friends would say, yesterday's fog was so amazing, you missed it by 1 day. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm here till Wednesday. They're like, okay, yeah, there's a good chance. And then I leave on Wednesday, and then Thursday, they're like, you missed it Thursday, we had the best fog. I'm like, damn. So I kind of just give it up, you know, like maybe it'll happen. And it happens between October and March, basically, but mostly November through February. And it can happen once a year, it can happen 10 times a year. It cannot happen at all. And what I came to learn after this, I had actually been in Bhutan for a month-long project, and the last 2 weeks were going further east off the tourist route and staying in farmhouses and places that didn't have running water all the time, and kind of roughing it, though in Bhutan it's very comfortable roughing it. And I'd already made friends with the people at the Shangri-La Hotel and the social media, and they gave me a good rate to stay. I decided that I don't usually stay at fancy places, but I decided after a month in Bhutan in the country, like 5 days at the Shangri-La would be really nice. Like it was justified. And I remember getting there, and they had just, it was after Gulf Photo Plus came back, and they had just handed me the X Pro 2. I had practiced this piano, and I remember emailing my friends at Fujifilm, and I was like, hey, I happen to be in a great place. If I happen to get fog, I can get some shots with the X Pro 2. And the first morning I went up there, and we were in the fog. It was just like wafting over us, right? And there were so many people on this little deck of the Shangri-La. And nobody was able to get the shot, but I met a lot of cool people, and there were some friends and everything. But I was like, man, if it gets foggy, there's no way I'm going to be able to get this shot. So the second morning, we left the room at about 3 a.m., went up top, and saw this. And fog is rare enough, but fog with clouds is once every 5 years. So it's a once in a 5-year chance, one day in 5 years that this can happen. Happened to be in one of the nicest locations to capture the fog compositionally, and guess how many people were up there? Not a single one. And you know why? They thought it was going to be so busy that it was impossible. So after I shot this, I had hours, Naomi and I by ourselves up there. Nobody came. Just a few tourists here and there going, wow, and Chinese tourists doing selfies, things like that. No photographers. Afterwards, everybody's like, oh, I bet the Shangri-La was so busy, huh? And I'm like, well, I felt so bad for everybody. But this was, it's degrees of how long you want to invest in shots. So we have, this is obviously the blue hour. There's a little bit of the sunrise. So in the morning, it's a late blue hour because there's some sun coming from the left that helps the illumination side of the Burj Khalifa. The fog looks abnormal because it is abnormal. I mean, you look at this and it doesn't even register as real when you're there. But it is a really fun thing to capture. And to me, it was worth the 6-year investment. And it kind of comes into when, like, you don't have, if not everybody has 6 years. But that was never on commission. I wasn't commissioned to shoot a lot of that stuff. That was just personal work that while I'm there, I'm trying to capture this vision. But I started to think a little bit more about moments in time. And that's how to basically put moments in time together. And what you're seeing here, and I'll explain more in a minute, is a blue hour and a sunset put together. So it's about 20 minutes in time blended together to take advantage of both the natural hue and the artificial light. Now you have to think about it this way. You visit a beautiful place like Santorini. You visit Ia. Chances are you're there, and well, here you're probably on your honeymoon or with somebody you love, and you're there and you're watching the sunset. You're looking at the lights. You're enjoying probably somebody playing music. You're smelling all the food. All of your senses go into something. And as photographers, it's very difficult because we have to take all of those senses and time and represent all of these things in a flat photograph, a single image. So I started thinking about it. When I'm describing something to somebody, am I describing an image or am I describing a memory? And my memory is not even a video, it's a sequence of events. It's something that happened over time. When I remember this, I remember how beautiful the sunset was. I remember the lights. I remember the blue dome churches. I remember how everything looked so beautiful. I remember all this, not as an image, but as a sequence of events. So Moments in Time was the idea of being able to blend all of the best parts of my memory together into a single image. And the other thing that works is it's because I leave my tripod in the same place. And the reason I actually got into this wasn't first about blending time. And how many times has this happened to you guys? You go somewhere to a new location, and you shoot through the sunset, you move around, you try different compositions, you do different things, and then once you get back to Lightroom, you look at it and you're like, I wish I would have stayed right there, and I wish I didn't move because the sky was so nice. That happened to me so much early in my career as a photographer that I decided to scout early, pick one location, and commit to it. And because I never moved the camera, it gave me the ability to blend time. So in these situations, you're seeing a camera never moving, staying static. So here is, again, Osaka Castle, a very beautiful castle, recently rebuilt because Japan is very seismic and they tend to burn things down in the historic days as well. But what I actually have is a sunset sky, and 15 minutes later, the illumination of the cherry blossoms. And I'll have a before and after to show you guys as well. Now, the first time that I experimented with this was along 5 years ago, I think, 5.5 years ago. This actually just came up in my Facebook memories. You know that Facebook thing? I thought it was really funny right before I was doing this event. I was like, wow, it's been that long? Facebook memories are cool, but they kind of make you feel old. You know? Like, I kind of like that. So the idea was first to be able to get the city lights and the sunset. But the main reason that I wanted to use moments in time here was to be able to capture a series of gondolae in a nice path. So that's what I did is basically I waited until there were nice boats. And the other thing is this is becoming more and more difficult these days because now when you're in Venice, nobody's wearing traditional clothes. They're wearing like Hello Kitty t-shirts and taking, either a selfie stick. The selfie sticks are hanging off the gondola, or, which is the weirdest thing, is I have my iPhone right here. Like, we shoot with our iPhones all the time like this, but we shoot with our iPads like this. I still don't understand the psychology of that. But this is the worst thing. You have to make sure if you want to get the gondola in Venice, wait for people to put their iPad down. It doesn't work. So I had to wait. The Riva boat, these boats are very famous. I wanted to make sure everything kind of came together. So I spent 4 hours there just shooting, and learning about moments in time. And it works really well. And last year I worked on a project with Adobe, and we used Greece as the model for all these things. And yes, I'm actually using physical locations as models for video. So what I'm using here, again, the lights and the sunset together. So natural and artificial light, sort of this harmony, again, with artificial and natural light. This is something that's and we're going to kind of take a look at this scene in post after the presentation portion of this. Have you guys ever shot a beautiful landscape, had the most amazing sunset, but your foreground is completely dark? Isn't that frustrating? Because before, the light was really harsh because it was in the sky, and the color wasn't nice. So what I've started to do was, what you're seeing is the sunset itself, but the sun is actually passed below the horizon. So what I've done is I've brought in some light from an earlier scene. So before that sun broke the mountain, went below it, it was still illuminating some of the light. Now, it's also important, the question that I'll get, I'm going to answer it, so I probably won't get the question at the end, is how far is too far? Well, that's what you need to decide. You have to decide, can you put a sunset in the Milky Way? Probably not. I don't think that works. But can you put the sunset and then a few minutes before with some of the light from the sun, from the natural sun? Yes, because that would be considered balanced light. And this is one of my favorite photos. This actually took me 2 years, 2 visits and about 13 to 14 shoots at the Chireda Pagoda in Fuji Yoshida. And what I like about this is it's shot during a sunset, 5-minute period that Mount Fuji revealed itself. Fuji is what we call it a cloud magnet. If there is one cloud in the sky, it'll be stuck on the top of Mount Fuji because it's the highest thing around. What you'll actually see here is I like this light because what I have Mount Fuji illuminated on its right side, the Chireda Pagoda is illuminated on its left side, the cherry blossoms are illuminated from underneath, from below, and the town itself is illuminated from within. So there are 4 different light sources, some natural, some artificial, all working together in harmony to do something. So this combination of light, this sort of harmony of artificial and natural light, and then getting all the colors to work together and sort of create, I like to say music, but that's too dramatic. We'll say that. And that actually leads into the more fun element of creating the extraordinary using what I like to call cosmic elements because it sounds cool. We say cosmic space kind of things. This is Petra, Jordan. This is the treasury in Petra. I know some of you guys have visited Petra before. And the reason that I visited was because of Indiana Jones. How many of you guys remember Indiana Jones? Okay, yeah. So I was fascinated with this because I grew up with Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. Those are the films that I love. So I really wanted to visit this, and I showed this image to my nephew, and my nephew's 12 now, and he said, Transformers! So apparently it's in Transformers. I did verify this. The Decepticons live here. So it's inspiring a new generation of people to visit. If you visit Petra by Night ceremony, they actually meticulously set up all of these candles, light these candles, and they have a very nice ceremony. While I was there, I just left the camera to capture a series of exposures. And I'll explain Star Trails a little bit more, just to capture something a little bit more unique. Not just the light from Petra by Night, but also the stars. The cosmic elements are really fun. So we'll go back to the same scene in Santorini. The most depressing thing for a landscape photographer is a blue sky. Because we want cloud drama, we want colors, we want everything, we want refracted light, we want all these things. And I sort of had this idea, in Greece, especially Southern Europe, most of the year is completely clear. Those fiery sunsets are very rare. Maybe 1 or 2 weeks they actually have clouds. And while I was there, I wanted to experiment. If it's so clear, can I actually capture star trails over these beautiful cityscapes? And it turns out that yes, you actually can. And it depends on the sky being clear. So it used to be that clear days I'd take off, rainy days I'd take off, nighttime I'd take off. Now I can't take any time off because I can shoot in the rain, I can shoot if it's clear. But it gave me more opportunity. And you can see here that they're streaking across the sky. Creates a nice look. It's not a rich amount of stars, but it's just enough to add something interesting. Cosmic elements aren't just stars, but the aurora itself doesn't get much more cosmic than that because it's literally energy coming from the sun. I think that's so cool. So if you think about things lining up for you, it's 1, being in a good location, 2, being somewhere where it's actually getting dark enough, further north enough. Also, sky needs to be pretty clear, the wind needs to be pretty calm, and we have to have solar activity coming from the sun. That's a lot of things to come together, to be in that right place, to be able to capture something. And in my opinion, it makes something even more special. Not just to see, but to be able to capture. Northern Lights are phenomenal. So that's about as cosmic as it gets for me. But star trails, I really love star trails. This is the Church of the Good Shepherd in southern New Zealand, South Island in New Zealand. Very beautiful. It's very busy now. I just have to warn you guys, and I'll show you a time lapse. It's probably the selfie capital of New Zealand now. Lots of iPadography going on here. But it's a thing. What you're seeing actually is the stars streaking across the sky. And what you're seeing is actually a series of 30-second exposures all blended together. And I have a cool time lapse to show you in a minute too. But the reason they're streaking across the sky is I'm actually shooting towards what's called the celestial meridian, or equator. And the normal way to say that is essentially east or west, like towards the equator, because that's going to be the rotation of the Earth and how the stars are spinning. Now, as opposed to Greece, you notice how there's many more stars in the sky here? This area is a dark sky preserve. In other words, there are no, well, there's a town. Town has to keep their lights dim, and the National Observatory is very close by. So it's made for stargazing. That's why you can see everything. It's also shot very wide. Notice how it's starting to bend towards the edges? That actually pulls into what's called the Polaris, or the center of rotation. North and south is actually the spinning of the globe. So this is close by to you guys. This is close to Surabaya in Indonesia. This is Mount Bromo. About July, August. July and August is the best time for the fog to roll into the caldera. And you can see that the center of rotation is highlighted there. The reason that I'm self-taught, 100% self-taught photography, the reason that I learned how to do star trails was for this particular shot. I spent 4 nights starting about 11 p.m. all the way to sunrise to shoot this, and I used what I call the best of 4. And what I was lucky is that the moon was up off to this side, actually illuminated some of the mountains themselves. Funny thing was I had a friend of mine hooked me up with his guide here, because it was a friend of his, but he spoke no English at all. And I was like happy to have his company because it was kind of creepy up there on the side of the mountain, because we found these areas to hike past the viewpoints. And he started making these fires out of plastic bags, but it was cold, and I'm like, well, I just won't breathe the plastic bag, it'll be fine. And then he said, music, and I'm like, yeah, music, that would be great. So he takes out his phone, and he starts playing Bon Jovi songs. And he loves Bon Jovi, and I'm like, cool, I like Bon Jovi too. But it turns out they're just ringtones. So they're like 15-second loops of Bon Jovi songs over and over and over and over and over, and burning plastic bags. So it takes the romanticism a little bit out of the location. But 4 sleepless nights and a lot of testing to be able to capture something that I really like. And this is the closest I've ever come to photographing an alien planet. It just looks like another world. 2 years ago, NASA was accepting applications for new astronauts. And when I was a kid, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an astronaut scientist. Turns out I'm not very good at math, so it was never going to happen. But I did send my resume and application to NASA. And guess what happened? They never even emailed me back. Apparently an art degree wasn't the degree they were looking for. So until until I can make friends with Elon Musk and convince him that I want to photograph the world from space, we have to settle for amazing location. And that kind of leads me into the next stage, which is post-processing. Is anybody a fan of Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Has anybody read that? His famous words on the front of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is "Don't panic." So I like to tell people in post-processing, don't panic. Every single photograph that you've seen is involved, honestly, with at least 3 of these steps. 90% of what you're seeing is raw file adjustment. That's because we live in a very good time in photography where our raw files are very powerful. Second stage would be exposure blending. Years ago, this was more important. Years ago, we may have been using HDR software, which we're not really using too much today, because we can do things in a single RAW. Exposure blending might be time blending, different things like that. Once all the RAWs are adjusted, once everything's sort of blended together the way it needs to be, then the post-processing actually takes place. I know that sounds funny, but that's when you start giving it color, contrast adjustments. That's when you give it that style, that look that you want. Maybe it's really high texture, high contrast, or a little bit more soft and muted tones depending on your output. Final stage actually is the simplest one, though it's done selectively. Sharpening and noise reduction. Now this is a step that is largely dependent on the type of photography that your output is going to be. So let's say you're shooting with the GFX 50X. That's 50 megapixels, right? How many pixels is that? Isn't that like 10,000 pixels, like 9,000 pixels, right? Something crazy like that. Let's say you're posting to Instagram. Instagram is 1080. 1080. Nobody's going to notice if you did the noise reduction and the sharpening on that, so don't worry too much about it. Facebook, 500px, maybe spend a little bit more time. I'm getting ready to do a fine art gallery at 1.5 meters. It's the size on the long side of my images. So I've gone back and meticulously masked every little bit of detail. So depending on how large you're going to produce your work, that determines how much time you spend on this. But that's why I'll go over a nonlinear workflow, and I'll kind of give you guys advice on how you can always go back into it and make tweaks without painting yourself into a corner. But that's it. All of that, no matter how complicated it was. And you can see here, there's that waterfall in southern Iceland, Seljalandsfoss. The only reason I remember it is because it's like somebody's trying to sell you land. So it's Seljalandsfoss. Now, you can see it has potential. Sky's a little bit blown out. It's a little bit dark in the foreground, right? And then there's a tour bus back here. So you have to get rid of the tour bus. So in the after, what I've done is I've balanced the raw, brought the sky back by recovering the highlights, pushing the shadows up a little bit to get that, and then a little bit of contrast for the color. And I definitely would get rid of anything that looks like a tour bus. Nothing says remote, distant landscape like Chinese tour bus. You have to be really careful about it. They're the biggest buses. They are. They pull up in like 3s or 4s. So this is, I'll stop. This is straight out of camera. This is a duck. Ducks, when they land in the water and they glide across it, so for long exposures, they're really annoying. So you have to get rid of them. Easy to get rid of. But what I actually wanted to do here, straight out of camera to finished, it's not that much different. But what I've done is I've just brought tones out. So the tonality on the right side, you can see that I'm losing it, and losing some of the buildings, and also getting a blue cast on the white parts of the buildings. So a large part of what I've done is created what's called color separation. So just as we're adding contrast and color, sometimes we're removing it. So if there's a really rough blue cast on white, then I'm bringing that, making it more of a pure white so it stands out. So that every color feels like it's separated. But it's not that difficult from a single raw, and it's not that far. Here's the example of this place. Now, a couple things have happened here. It's a Kiwi weekend, so there's a bottle of beer that somebody left there. There's some footprints. It might have been my footprint. I don't even know. But the sky's a little bit blown out, but you notice that sky is actually, it's an incredible sky already. But also pay attention to the shadows when I do this. Pretty wild, right? I mean, I saw the green there, but when I was in post and I was in Lightroom and I put the slider over, I actually was able to get that detail back in. It was pretty cool. But you can see that's basically a single raw. And there's some little corrections here and there. Now, this led me into doing some things that were a little bit more interesting. So this is the road to Mount Cook. That's Mount Cook in the background. The name of this photo is the road to Mount Cook because I was feeling very uncreative when I was naming photos. I am usually a little bit better about it. What I wanted to do was shoot this. This is about 120 millimeters standing on the side of the road. I wanted to wait for the traffic to be able to capture not only the scene, but the light trails moving through it. I thought that that would be a pretty cool harmony of artificial and natural light. What happened, though, is by the time it got dark enough, there was no traffic. There were no cars. So I had to have my friends Lee and Patrick drive back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I recently had Naomi do that in Monument Valley, too. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Bumpy, dusty road, back and forth. But it was kind of cool. So this is when we're starting to get into moments in time. So there are combinations of blending moments in time. And here's that example. This is straight out of camera, Osaka Castle. You can see that the sky has some potential, but everything's very flat. About 15 or 20 minutes later, it becomes dark enough for the lights to come on. But at the point where the lights came on, the sky turned blue. So I decided to leave the sky and the castle as a base, and then just bring in the lights. So that there we have the first one, which is raw adjustment. Now I have exposure blending. Step 3, contrast adjustment. Very simple. And then there's also some sharpening applied. So 3 to 4 step process. I also was a little ambitious to remove the building there and recreate all those little trees. I won't do that again. That took more time than I thought it was going to. So this is another shot of Santorini. I have a lot of work there just because I use this island very often. Now, again, straight out of camera, potential for the sky. It's looking pretty nice. And now what I've done is added contrast to that sky and brought in that next level of lighting. So that's the natural and artificial light. Oh, this is also that before and after of that same location. This is straight out of camera, but I want to point out that it's underexposed. It's underexposed because I always want to try to expose for the highlights. In the second half of this, I'll show you guys the examples of the raw files and why we expose for the highlights. So what I've done is I brought the shadows back up and I've brought that time. Largely, the sky has pretty much stayed the same. What I've done is just added the contrast and added a little warmth back into it. But you see this harmony of artificial and natural light has sort of become my sort of go-to element. Doesn't work all the time, but sometimes it does. And here's that shot of Meteora. So you can agree it's a little dark in the foreground, right? Not really acceptable, but with a little bit of nurturing of the raw file and some extra layering, it all comes back. And this probably happens to us the most. This happens all the time, especially in Rome, especially when we're shooting into something that's bright, sunset. We get a beautiful sky, and Rome gets amazing skies. I don't know, it's something about where it is on the globe, the position of it, and also the dust coming from Africa mixes with the atmosphere and actually gives these red colors. But nothing's going on in the foreground. Even if I were to adjust the shadows, it would just be a dull version of no detail. So what I do is I wait and I bring all that light together. And I was very unlucky in this visit. They were actually doing maintenance on the Vatican, and I'm Italian, so I can say this, so the idea of Italians doing maintenance is like, what? They never do maintenance. But now it's all LED, believe it or not. But this gives me the ability to bring all of that light back. And here's that example of Hong Kong. This is the rare Hong Kong sunrise, where we can actually see the sun in Hong Kong. And then what I've done is very simply just brought in the light from the city as well. So it creates these moments in time. Now, this is something I just shot with the GFX recently in New York. This is straight out of camera. This is 30 seconds. I don't know if you guys know this about the GFX camera, but if you set it to the timer mode, you can do 1 hour exposures in camera. So you can set it. And with the XT2, the recent firmware, up to 15 minutes without having to use bulb mode. So this is a 30-second exposure straight out of camera. But what's happened is the sun is, you can see it right here, just below that little haze. But a few minutes earlier, I had this really nice light on the pylon, so I brought this light on the pylons back. The next phase was to not bump the camera and wait for the lights in the city to come on. So there's the blending. The last thing was to pull it all together with some contrast adjustment in the foreground. So this was a really fun location, and again, combining all of that light together. And by the time that the city lights came on, the sky was blue, completely blue. Now, I want to point out that this is spanning a few minutes. It can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe even 45 minutes. But it's not to say that that's the only way to get artificial and natural light together. If you're in, for example, Stockholm, Sweden in the summertime, your blue hour is about 4 hours long. Sunset lasts about 2.5 hours. So chances are in the city, you're going to be able to get a fiery sky and the lights. At certain times of the year in Italy, for example, in the summertime, near the summer solstice, your sunset is not going to be finished until about 10:30 at night. So you're going to get nice light from like 9:30 all the way to almost 11 o'clock. So the lights will turn on and you'll still get the nice sky. So it's not impossible what I'm doing here. It's just impossible for most of the year. But what this gives me the ability to do, and this was contract work, it's to be able to use all of these tools that I have as a photographer and use these technical aspects to be able to get the shot, even if I can't be there for that one day of year that it happens to be, you know, the right timing where I can get the sunset in the blue hour, because who knows what the weather is going to do. This gives me more tools to be able to shape the vision that I have before I go to location. Now, this is the Church of the Good Shepherd. This is basically the star trails. And as I'm capturing star trails, it's a sequence of 30-second exposures. And they're just 30-second exposures all put together with a light and blending mode, using After Effects to put this together. But can you guys see something wrong with the foreground there? This is years ago. It's exponentially more difficult now. So I knew that this wouldn't work. I'm not going to be able to use this for a portfolio piece. So what I'll always do is start with a control element. So this is my control. This is shot at the late blue hour before the stars start to come out. And this gives me the ability to use a well-shot image. And when I say well-shot, the stars themselves are shot at f2.8, 30-second exposures, ISO 1600 or so. This is shot at f8, 30 seconds, so it's extremely sharp. So what I was actually able to do was take this, plus this, to create this. And all I'm doing is actually capturing the different pieces of time. So it actually becomes really fun. And you have to be very patient. You have to stay in a location for a while. And, you know, landscape photography seems very romantic until you start standing there for hours and hours. When I try to tell people, you know, if you want to join me, we're going to enjoy the location for a long time, a very long time. But it gives me the ability to create something different, something unique. And I always challenge myself to put different elements together that are sometimes difficult to capture, or something that just gives some sort of emotional response. Now, what we're actually going to get into next, oh, actually, I forgot to put the slide in here. I actually teach all this stuff in long form with f-stoppers. We created a series called Photographing the World. We just released the third one, which was a lot of fun. I actually teach and do the post-processing on this fog shot, and we have a lot of different things in Dubai. So it is available, and if nothing else, I'm not really trying to get you guys to buy the series or anything. If nothing else, watch the behind the scenes. They're pretty funny. Like, we actually have sort of a YouTube show that we create that's for free, that everybody can watch the behind the scenes process of capturing these images. And Lee and Patrick from F-Stoppers are kind of drama queens, so it is kind of funny. But we're going to take a short break for coffee and